World Level 9, for those who are strong enough to tackle its challenges, is so far praised quite highly for its benefits, namely over the fact that it seeks to answer an ongoing request from Genshin players. That is, to respect their time and not waste it. Especially now with the addition of Imaginarium Theater, it's more important than ever before that players can build characters, and lots of them in reasonable amounts of time. Although it doesn't benefit brand new accounts, longtime players who may not quite be able to call themselves veterans can still profit from an increased volume of materials as they work their way towards AR60. I'm someone who's in that group, and I can happily say that I'm swimming in materials from Natlan and even older regions that I've gone back to just to farm. Gone are the days where you might be running short on materials from the Pyro Fatui agent and cursing yourself since you just rarely run into that enemy to fight them normally. Now you can just run a farming route for a day or two and have extras to spare. It isn't just regular and elite mobs either, of course. World bosses have been another exciting change, seeing drop rates for character ascension materials going from just 2 or 3 up to 3 as a minimum, sometimes even 4. For the resin-minded individuals, this is an extremely important jump in the quality observed by players. After all, to get a character to the final ascension, you need a total of 46 of their materials. Back when your average was around 2.5 per fight, that meant 18 or 19 times fighting the boss. A minimum drop of 3 changes things completely, meaning you'll never need to fight that boss more than 16 times to get all that you need. This should mean less time and resin spent killing world bosses, letting players allocate their resin to other things that are required to build characters. If you're building a lot of characters, then it's something that is definitely going to add up on your time saved. The only problem is, it's not that simple. Resin is Genshin's own time-gated resource. A staple to live service gacha games, it's an artificial method of limiting a player's progress so that people don't dump tens if not hundreds of hours in one go to max everything. The reasoning, of course, is that these players would then become bored and quit playing the game. Games like Genshin can always try to entice players back with new characters to roll for, but it's much simpler if those players are still there, regularly logging in. This is why resin exists, as well as other methods of player retention like the Battle Pass, daily logins, weekly bosses, and more. Genshin benefits from a consistent player base, so miHoYo will do everything it can and use all the tools in its arsenal to ensure this. That is to say, from the beginning, resin and how much we get and what we can use it for has been tuned into an intentional balance to make sure that things don't take too much or too little time. We got to see a change in the resin cap, which certainly was a meaningful change for daily players, but it did not in any way affect things on a longer period of time. Building any character would still take the same amount of resin as before, and it then raises the question of why exactly World Level 9 has become a thing. Did miHoYo finally decide that their system was flawed and that things could be sped up a bit? Unfortunately, everything that I have seen is that the answer is no. There's a lot of things involved in ascending a character, and we've already looked at world boss materials which had an increase in their drop rate. But what about elemental gems? This is where the supposed generosity of World Level 9 begins to fall apart. Here is Shalonen's required materials to achieve her final ascension. If we look at the elemental gems, we see the 4 levels of them, and to make our calculations simple, we can break them down into how many we need of the lowest level material, the slivers. Each gemstone takes 3 chunks, so they're worth 18 chunks. Add the 9 chunks you see to get 27. Each chunk can be made of 3 fragments, so now you have 81 fragments. Add another 9 for what you see on the image, and you end up needing 90 fragments. Now you just need to multiply by 3 for the total number of slivers, plus 1 for the very first ascension, and you have a value of 271 slivers to reach the final ascension from 0. So then, how long does it take to get that much? Well, on average, you gotta think about how many slivers you get when you fight a world boss. Here's an old chart of the drop rates that I pulled off of Traveler.gg. According to the credits, it comes from data pulled from the Genshin Impact Data Gathering Discord. Back in World Level 8, you got about 8.68 per run based on the data collected, and a tiny bit less from world level 7. If you take the best case scenario and say you get a little lucky and average 9 per run, that is over 30 runs to get enough of the elemental gems to take a character from 0 to max. Unfortunately, the data gathering Discord does not appear to have released anything for world level 9 yet, so we're still in the dark on what exactly the new average comes out to. I've made a moderate effort to record my own drops, but at the moment I only have 18 runs and a small data set doesn't really inspire great confidence. What I can say though is that so far there is no appreciable difference and increase in those drop rates. Even ignoring all of this, elemental gems are still a really complicated thing to consider when talking about resin efficiency. Characters from the initial release of the game were pretty straightforward. Pyro characters are a one-stop shop at the Pyro Reg is fine, Cryo at the Cryo Reg is fine, and so on. MiHoYo has of course changed that up with many characters requiring materials from bosses that do not drop the correct elements, meaning you either need to use Dust of Azoth to convert, or you need to farm another boss entirely. There is of course other ways to earn elemental gems, such as during events or from dailies, but this alone is not going to have a meaningful difference. After all, if you do your daily commission every day for an entire year, you'd only have 365 slivers, and even then, to use them all on one character would require Dust of Azoth. Weekly bosses also drop elemental gems, so they can be considered a source as well, but those are also limited in how much you can run them. Even in a best case scenario where your elemental gems are the right kind from a boss, if you're working from 0, the boss materials will never be the actual bottleneck holding you back from ascending a character. Essentially, you can say goodbye to that 16 run maximum figure that I threw around earlier. The only irony is that world level 9 may be slightly more efficient on your Dust of Azoth when the elemental gems are the wrong type, since you can switch to a boss that drops the correct ones sooner. Now, is everyone going to notice the effects of this? Not necessarily, especially if you've played a lot and built up a stockpile of elemental gems from alternate sources while focusing resin on things other than ascension materials. In my own case, I've killed a lot of world bosses just to have their materials on hand for characters I intend to build, but since I haven't cashed in on that yet, I'm sitting on a decent amount of elemental gems, which means the next couple of characters should be pretty simple to get to 90 if that's what I desire. If you're a player who doesn't care to ascend lots of characters too far, or maybe even at all, then you may never run into a problem. It's things like this that have me genuinely impressed with how MiHoYo has handled this situation to make World Level 9 look as good as it does to so many people, when the truth about it is pretty different. Ultimately, what's important to recognize is that World Level 9 has done absolutely nothing to meaningfully change the time it takes to max characters when measured up to how much resin is required. Where they focused on boss materials, they ignored the true bottleneck, that's elemental gems. And to add to things that they made no changes to, we can look at the ley lines of Mora or Experience, which have actually had the exact same rewards since World Level 6. Domains also remain capped out at level 90, meaning you won't see any more efficiency in farming for talent materials, weapon materials, or artifacts. The only place where World Level 9 makes a meaningful difference is in how much time you need to spend fighting regular and elite mobs which respawn every day. If you have characters who are strong enough to handle World Level 9, then it isn't like there is any reason to not be there. Just don't expect to max characters any faster than before.